Ultra Instinct, the infamous technique used by the gods and unlocked by Goku in the Tournament of Power. In today's video, I'm gonna toss Deku a bone and say he just wakes up with it some random day, and bam, he now has Ultra Instinct. But obviously I can't just give him the real thing or his body would literally explode, be torn to shreds. So we're gonna make it a quirk and see what happens. If you enjoy the video, remember to hit the like button and smash the red button, seeing as only a small percentage of you guys are actually subscribed. And that said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We start a story in the perspective of a young Izuku, about 6 to 7 years old. Yeah, let's go with 7. So Izuku's simply sitting in the cafeteria, enjoying his time, unwrapping his Lunchables. Honestly, same old, same old. Bakugo was about to come up to Izuku to pull one of his usual quote-unquote pranks on Izuku by blasting an explosion right next to Izuku, scaring him and causing him to be like, "Bakugo, why'd you do that?" like usual. But instead, when Bakugo goes to throw that explosion towards Izuku's direction, Izuku this time just dodged. It was as if his body knew it was coming. Izuku didn't even know Bakugo was behind him, and for some reason, he moved without his body, without him having to tell his body to move, if that makes sense, without knowing it. Izuku would look to see Bakugo behind him, and it's at this point that Bakugo would be like, "What the?" before he throws another explosion at Izuku, and Izuku would be like, "Bakugo, what's the problem?" Bakugo would say he's sorry about that, but he thought Izuku dodged out of the way for a second, saying that he should know better than to dodge one of his little pranks on him. And Izuku would say, "That hurt, Bakugo." From here, we would end up having Bakugo be like, "Yeah, whatever." And he ends up walking off with his lackeys saying, "Catch you later, Izuku," before he then goes on to leave with his lackeys and simply just leave Deku there to pick up the pieces. The very next day, Bakugo would be thinking to himself as he's walking right next to Deku if the same weird occurrence would happen again. And so Bakugo would decide, you know what, whatever, let me just try it one more time. And so Bakugo would go over to Izuku right before Izuku could even notice that Bakugo was there, and he was sure of it. Bakugo threw an explosion to the side of Deku, which Deku immediately dodged out of the way, before then standing up and looking towards Bakugo with a strange aura around his body, and his eyes had changed colors for just a second, before Izuku's body pretty much collapses onto the floor. Bakugo would look at him and say, "What? I didn't even hit him with an explosion." Teachers would come in and they would begin to pretty much call Inko on the phone and send Izuku to the nurse, where from here, he would be picked up and taken to the quirk doctor, where they would be wondering what just happened. It's as if Izuku activated his quirk, Bakugo would say. "It's strange, his eyes changed colors, that's not normal, right?" And so Deku would be taken to the quirk doctor, where they would begin wondering if Izuku does in fact have a quirk. He ends up going to see another doctor, not Dr. Ujiko, and from here, Izuku is told by this doctor that it appears that her son, or Inko's son, actually does have a quirk. And it's strange, it's almost as if it doesn't belong in his body. It's incompatible with him completely. You're lucky that this quirk didn't rip you to limb from limb, this quirk is extremely powerful. It appears as if it gives you the ability to move on your own without yourself even wanting to react. It basically makes your body do things without you having to even try to do them. And Izuku would look to the doctor before saying, "Wait, so I have a quirk?" And the doctor would say, "Well, yeah," before Izuku would jump up with excitement, being like, "Yes, yes!" This man Izuku is so happy. But from here, what ends up happening is essentially Izuku would just, like I said, he's just happy. And so when he arrives home, he would end up telling his mom that he's going to begin working on mastering his quirk as soon as possible, that now there's hope for him to become a pro hero. He and Inko would go out to celebrate, and for the following next couple of years, Izuku would essentially do calisthenics, weight training, as well as a little bit of martial arts to prepare himself with his quirk, leading to an Izuku who's not half as shy and is also not cocky at the same time, because we have to keep in mind, Izuku cannot exactly master Ultra Instinct. This isn't something that he's just gonna night and day wake up and master. Whis is not there, so it's not exactly gonna be some technique from the gods, because Deku's body would literally be ripped limb from limb. It's just not gonna happen. So instead, it's like a toned down version in a version of quirk, which is still really powerful, just not half as powerful. I mean, if you take Ultra Instinct and divide its power by like 10, you still have Ultra Instinct, and it still would pretty much solo almost any other verse. So when it comes to its power, don't worry, it's still there, and its abilities are still there as well. That said though, what ends up happening is essentially we cut to the point where Izuku's just sitting in the back of the classroom. Bakugo walks in with his goons, looks to Izuku before giving him his usual snarl, and sits on his desk before putting his feet up and then proceeding to act asleep until the teacher eventually would walk in, throw papers in the air before informing everybody that he already knows they wanted to become heroes. Throws them up with the class cheering and pretty blatantly flailing out their quirks. Izuku would be one of the only people alongside Bakugo who wasn't going absolutely bananas for this. And so, when the teacher then begins to read off the list of people who want to go to UA, and Bakugo hears the mention of Izuku, he's like, "What? Izuku? What are you doing trying to get into UA? You don't belong there, you quirkless." Before he then stops and he's like, "Wait, he does have a quirk. You don't belong there. People like me only belong there. People with powerful, useful quirks. You can't even manage to use yours for 5 minutes. How do you expect to become a pro hero?" Deku looks at Bakugo and says that he'll find a way. He's been training, he knows that. And Bakugo would throw an explosion at his desk, which Izuku would dodge, and Bakugo would get extremely angry at, saying, "Always dodging out of the way. Why don't you ever fight back?" Izuku would look at him before being like, "I don't know. I guess I never had to." And Bakugo would look at him pretty angry before throwing another explosion, which the teacher would yell out, "Katsuki Bakugo, throw another one of those explosions and you'll be expelled." And Bakugo would quiet down before then going back to his seat and giving Deku a death glare. Deku would proceed to simply just sit there until the end of the class, and when Bakugo goes over to try to snatch his book out of Izuku's hand, Izuku's able to dodge out of the way, shove it in his backpack, and put it on his back, before he then looks to Bakugo and says, "So what do you want to do today, Bakugo? You want to try fighting again? I'll just get out of the way of each one of your attacks like usual." With Bakugo just rubbing some of the dust off of Deku's desk, being like, "You know, Izuku, I always have wondered one thing. How come you never fight back? I've been wondering, and I've come to the conclusion that it's probably because you can't. What's somebody like you gonna do in a hero world? What, you're just gonna dodge out of the way? How's that gonna help anybody? What happens when a villain is terrorizing people? You're just gonna keep dodging it? You won't be any help to anybody. You might as well be quirkless. Yeah, you can't get hurt, but what good does that do? Nothing. You can't even fight back against me, even if you tried." As he throws an explosion at Deku, and he dodges by leaping out of the way, slightly getting a bit injured by it, before Bakugo looks at him once more and throws another explosion that Deku uses his body to do a backflip with, barely dodging. Bakugo would grit his teeth before saying, "Whatever. Guys, let's go." Deku would end up essentially leaving the area, before then proceeding to take a different path home, seeing as he's already late. And once he would do so, he would end up going underneath the tunnel, just thinking to himself, "Another day of Bakugo being a jerk. I guess it's not unexpected. I'm used to it by now." And also thinking to himself that what Bakugo said was right. I mean, what good is he if he can't even fight back against these villains? His quirk of his is cool. I mean, at least now he has a quirk and he can't get hurt himself, but what good is it if he can't exactly stop villains? Just move out of the way and elongate the inevitable. What does he do? Izuku would ponder these thoughts for a while, until eventually a green sludge would appear right behind himself, coming out of a strange looking tunnel. When Izuku would turn back around, he would see the sludge villain about to approach Izuku, as it would say, "Give me your body, kid." And Deku would look at it before saying, "Ugh!" And his body would immediately jump out of the way, and he essentially begins dodging, jumping, leaping all over the place, avoiding the sludge villain. Even its fastest attacks, Izuku's able to slightly keep up with it and barely stay out of its range of attack. The sludge villain would eventually begin getting very, very tired and being like, "What's your deal with this kid? Fight back or something at least. Run away, you're making it boring. I need your body, kid. I didn't know he was in town." And Izuku would say, "What are you talking about? You don't know who was in town." Before suddenly, you can hear some like strange background music. Well, obviously you can't hear background music, but it's almost as if Izuku could hear it in his mind. When he saw All Might bust out of the tunnel, he could hear the dun da 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 da, like strange All Might theme song basically from season 1. Izuku would just look as he was standing right in front of the sludge villain, who just turned its eyes and looked at All Might, got scared, and All Might looked at it before saying, "Texas smash!" Throwing a full power blow at the sludge monster. The sludge monster would proceed to just get splattered all over the walls as Izuku remained standing there, being like, "All Might!" As All Might would just look at Izuku, and Izuku would explain to All Might that he's his biggest fan and that, he would like his autograph. All Might would begin laughing, and Izuku would actually help All Might collect the pieces of sludge in the bottle, before then proceeding to look to All Might and tell him that he has been his biggest fan since he can remember, and that he's one of the biggest reasons why Izuku tries his hardest every single day to become a pro hero just like him. All Might would tell him he's doing a great job and that he hopes to see him at UA if that's where he's going, and Izuku would be like, "Oh, definitely," before he would say, "What do you mean see me at UA? I won't see you again, right?" All Might is like, "Oh, no, yeah, you won't see me again," before he then proceeds to take the sludge villain and be like, "Well, I'm off, citizen," before he then jumps off, and just because I need this to happen, he drops a sludge villain bottle. Okay, I know it wouldn't usually happen unless Deku was on his leg, but let's just say that it happens because plot, okay? That said, he would end up dropping the sludge villain just like usual, and Izuku would end up inevitably hearing explosions. When Izuku would hear this, he immediately would turn his attention towards the direction and begin running towards them, hoping to see the villain attack or the heroes in action. When he would arrive, he would be towards the back of the crowd as he would be wondering what the heroes are doing to stop all this. He looks around as he sees a bunch of different heroes and he's like, "What are they doing?" But then he hears a bunch of muttering from the crowd saying, "What are the heroes doing? How come they don't act?" Suddenly they would begin to say that the heroes don't have the right quirks, and it's at that same moment that Izuku would catch wind of who was exactly the person that the sludge villain had under its quirk. He would turn to see Katsuki Bakugo, his classmate, childhood friend. And when Izuku sees this, it's almost as if Ultra Instinct would snap into his body right at the right time, and Izuku would gain a visible Ultra Instinct sign aura around himself. His eyes would slightly change color, and he begins to essentially get a strange tint to himself as he begins running with his body simply running in front of everything. The sludge villain would begin trying to throw its arms and stuff at it, but Izuku would throw his backpack towards the direction of the sludge villain before dodging and jumping out of each and every single one of its attacks, not by just dumb pure luck, but because of simple skill. People would begin yelling, "Kid, get out of the way!" But Izuku is just far too gone into this, and he can't simply stop himself at this point. Izuku would turn to the direction of the crowd and he would say, "I have to do this," before his body just begins moving. Izuku could only think to himself in his consciousness, "So crap, oh crap, oh crap, what am I doing?" But his body is just doing all the work for him. He eventually makes his way towards Bakugo and begins trying to gnaw off all the sludge off of him before trying to grab his arm and try to actively rip Bakugo out of it, giving Bakugo precious seconds to breathe, as suddenly the big bad All Might would arrive, and he would say, "United States of Smash!" before he then promptly changes the weather, and the sludge villain would be splattered to pieces everywhere. Izuku would look to Bakugo's direction as Bakugo begins coughing out some sludge from his throat, and All Might would look to Izuku before giving him a smile and a thumbs up. Everybody would watch this as the pro heroes would be just they don't know what to say, because clearly Izuku was able to dodge out of the way for long enough for All Might to arrive, but what if things had gone differently? They would still scold him and tell him that he shouldn't do that, and then Izuku would inevitably just walk home, thinking to himself that he at least tried. Izuku would think that, that's a good thing, and he would begin continuing walking home before suddenly All Might would appear before him. Editing Zither here, I completely forgot to add the sponsor, so here it is. As anime fans, we love to show our support to our favorite shows by rocking anime apparel. But something I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is it's so expensive. So I've partnered up with Fandom to bring you all affordable, high quality anime merch that you are sure to love. And if you use my code Zither at checkout, you can even get an extra 10% off the already affordable merch. Keep in mind, it does come from overseas sellers, so its sizing is going to be different since it's overseas. That said, let's get back into the video. And when Izuku sees All Might, he'd be like, "All Might, what are you doing here?" Before All Might begins to tell him that he saw the way that he performed out there, and he would tell him that that's something that only a true hero would do. It was almost as if his body moved on his own. He would look to Izuku before asking him what quirk he has, and Izuku would say, "It's a little hard to explain, but essentially, my body moves on its own." All Might would say, "Wait, seriously?" And Izuku would be like, yeah, before rubbing the back of his head, being like, essentially, I can dodge things basically without having to think about it. I still can't hit things without thinking about it, but I can dodge and I can switch in and out of dodging things and trying to actively think. So that's pretty much how I've been fighting for the past couple of years. And All Might would be kind of dumbfounded by this before then saying, well, that's an interesting quirk. He would ask if it makes him any stronger, and Izuku would be like, not really. I'm still just like everybody else. I just do a little bit of training here and there. And All Might would be like, he begins laughing before then looking to Izuku and saying that he has guts for doing what he did back there. For Izuku would be like, yeah, but what about my quirk? Why is it that you want to know, All Might? And All Might would say, right, I'm gonna get to the point, kid. Before his expression turns to that of more of a serious one, and he then begins to explain his injury to Izuku, telling him that he got this a couple years ago, with Izuku looking at it being like, was it against the battle against Chainsaw Man? All Might would say, close, but not quite, kid. He would then begin to explain that he fought against a villain unlike any other that the world has ever seen before, and that this ended up happening. That he's been looking for a successor for quite some time. And Izuku would be like, wait, back it up. Are you trying to say you want me to take one for all? Before All Might would say, that's exactly what I want. And Izuku would be like, but quirks can't be passed on. What are you talking about? And when I said one for all, I mean your quirk is what I should have said instead of the actual name. But All Might would then begin to explain the nature of his quirk and how he can actually pass it down. And once Izuku hears the brunt of all this, he then looks to All Might and says, but why me? I mean, I can barely control my own quirk, and it took this long for me to barely even be able to use it in short bursts. I might as well be quirkless. Before All Might looks to him and says, look, young man, I understand your doubts, but that heroic heart that you just displayed out there, that's something that not many other heroes have. You saw the way those heroes simply stood by as that kid clearly needed help. We need more people like you in this society. That's why I chose you to be my successor. For then getting eye to eye level with Izuku and telling him that he knows he once used to be quirkless himself. For Izuku looks at All Might and says, no way, you quirkless? But you're All Might. All Might would look at him and say, so what does that mean? I mean, yeah, I'm All Might, but that doesn't really amount to anything when you look at a big picture. Izuku would just look to All Might, look down, and say, yeah, I'll take the quirk. All Might would smile before plucking out a piece of his hair and then looking at Izuku's body, being like, can you take your shirt off for me? Izuku would be like, hold on, All Might, I didn't know you were that kind of hero. And All Might would be like, no, kid, I mean for my quirk, I just want to see if your body's physically ready for it. And Izuku would do so before All Might would see that Izuku is clearly in tip-top shape. He's about the same body build as like he was at like season 4 or around there. So yeah, Izuku would look to All Might before then being like, look, here's what I'm working with so far. And All Might would be extremely happy with, you know, the shape that Izuku's in before passing him the hair and being like, eat this. Izuku would take it in his hand and be like, sure thing, All Might, before gobbling it down and be like, ugh, I never have to do that again. And All Might would say, it's just a one-time thing, young man. Before then looking to Izuku and telling him to meet him at this spot the next day, giving him his number and then nodding to Izuku before Izuku would go home at night, and Inko would begin freaking out, being like, you were at a villain attack? Not only that, but you're so irresponsible, before, you know, getting down on Izuku and just being like, she's just glad he's safe. Izuku would then get some grub, pass out, and the next day immediately run off to Dagobah Beach to meet All Might. This is where he would go towards the direction that All Might gave him, and he would proceed to essentially be like, so All Might, what's our first task of business? All Might would look at Izuku before then saying, oh, our first task, cleaning this beach. And All Might would be like, yep, clean this beach. As Izuku's dumbfounded, he's like, ain't no way you want me to clean this beach. And All Might would be like, oh, there is way. You're gonna clean this beach top to bottom, and you have 10 months to do so, while you're also going to be doing strength and conditioning training with me, and also trying to learn your quirk for about an hour a day. All Might would then look to Izuku and then tell him to try it out, before he then looks at him and tells him to squeeze his butt cheeks and from the bottom of his heart say, smash! Before he then looks towards Izuku, and Izuku would just clench his fist up, breathe in, I can do this. he would reel his arm back and say, "Smash!" before he then throws a full power punch and pretty much shatters his arm. Izuku would look at his arm and be like, "All Might, what happened?" And All Might would be like, "Okay, maybe don't do that." Before Izuku would then begin to be rushed to recovery girl at UA, and she would heal him up a little bit. She would tell All Might that he was reckless, and that if he's going to be teaching this young man how to use his quirk, he at least has to try to do something right, not letting him break every bone in his body. With All Might holding the back of his head, being like, "Yes, didn't think about that. I mean, I could use the quirk off rip, so I just assumed he would as well." Before he then looks towards Izuku and says, "Looks like we're going to have to do some work." And about 2 days later, when Izuku's arms is a little better, he begins doing his strength and conditioning training. Until eventually, about 6 months would pass and the entire beach would be clean. Since All Might told him that he was not allowed to use his quirk, Izuku had to do it with nothing but his raw physical strength, ending up amassing to Izuku getting a huge boost in his physical strength, leading to Izuku having a better grasp of One For All when he's finally able to use it in full cowling, which he does eventually end up learning, not because of Gran Torino, because keep in mind, he's not going to be meeting him until like season 3, I believe it was. So Izuku instead has to figure these things out on his own, and boy does he deliver. This man ends up tapping into full cowling out of nowhere, and when he feels the power going through his body, he's shocked. It's almost as if for the first time ever, he feels as if he could genuinely break through his limits. Not only that, but his quirk of Ultra Instinct actually ended up getting a boost, because that's what All For One is. It's a stockpiling quirk. So it helps him out in the long run, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see him use it during the rest of the series. So that said, Izuku would look to All Might before All Might would tell him to test it out. Izuku would test out One For All, and he would look to Izuku before saying, "All right, young Izuku, we're going to do a little bit of sparring to find out where you're at." Izuku would look at him and say, "Right." Jumping back into where I had left off in the previous part with the cliffhanger, All Might would look towards Midoriya's direction as he would say, "Now look here, Midoriya, just because we're training doesn't mean I'm going to take it easy on you. You need to try your best and avoid getting injured. Is that all right with you?" Izuku would look at him and then say, "Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not." He gets into fighting position as All Might would as well, and immediately the battle would start with Izuku rushing in at All Might's direction. All Might would throw a punch, Izuku would close and open his eyes, and his body would react. It's as if he dodged it perfectly. Izuku would get 0 damage to his body, and he would proceed to essentially start dodging all of All Might's punches. Obviously, All Might is holding back quite heavily just to keep things even, since at this point, Izuku only has access to about 15% full cowling, I believe is what I said on the previous part. And Izuku is, well, trying to do his best. He would begin amping up full cowling just a little bit more, and his body would begin to slightly be able to keep up with it. He feels a little bit of tension whenever he's using full cowling, but he's doing his best not to show it. He would begin getting into the same like dodge thing with All Might, and All Might would begin to slightly amp up the pressure to the point where it would become increasingly harder for Izuku to dodge one of his blows, but eventually Izuku would duck under one of All Might's hits and punch him straight at the side of the gut where his injury's at with a full 15% smash. He hits All Might and All Might would cough out blood before like being sent back flying, and then he would get back up onto one knee as he would say, "Right, Midoriya." He would get back up as he would say, "Fine." He would tap into 100% and rush into Midoriya before he could even react. And even with Ultra Instinct, Izuku would slightly be able to dodge by a millimeter. After Izuku dodges, it's as if his Ultra Instinct state went away, and Izuku would put both arms in front of his face as to block All Might's huge haymaker he's about to throw, and he would get sent flying into the ocean, as Izuku would pretty much be sent into the air. And in the air, he would just be thinking, "Why'd you take it so far, All Might?" As he would crash into the water, and Izuku would cough back up, being like, "All Might," as he begins trying to swim back to shore, and All Might would think to himself that he might have overdone it just a little bit. Izuku would get onto the beach and would say, "You think, All Might?" As All Might would begin laughing, and he would say, "Ah, shucks, young Midori, I apologize for that." But Izuku would just be like, "Whatever, All Might, don't worry about it. So what do we do now?" All Might would look at him and say, "Well, from the progress you're making so far, it appears that for the first time forever, I don't know if you noticed it, but you attacked. Were you still using Ultra Instinct?" Izuku would look at him and say, Yeah, I think so, I'm not sure." And All Might would look towards him as he would say, "Well, that's what we're going to continue working on. Once a day from now on, we're going to begin sparring every single day until you're able to actually attack back in the state of Ultra Instinct. We're going to try to make it so that you can actually last more than about 2 minutes in that state. And we're also going to be working on full cowling so you can heighten that percentage. For the next couple of months, that's all we'll be doing. Go home for today, get some rest, and then we'll pick this up tomorrow. Izuku would look at him and say, "Understood, All Might. See you tomorrow." As All Might would wave to him, and in a flash, the first day of, well, not the first day, but his exam day for taking the entrance exam would arrive, almost as if it happened from that day to the next. Izuku would get dropped off by his mother Rinko at the doors, and when he arrives there, he would just be walking, spots a girl with some brunette hair, or brownish hair, sorry. And as he does this, he just thinks nothing of it. He continues walking inside until suddenly the girl would pretty much fall, and Izuku would be like, "Whoa, you good?" As he catches her, and she immediately starts blushing. She's like, yeah, thanks." As Izuku's like, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it. It was just my quirk. I figured it was bad luck to trip on the first day." He waves bye to her and walks into the entrance exam place as he proceeds to get a really, really high score. I'd say about like 10 points extra than what he got in the original. And yeah, that's that. When it comes to the robot portion, after Ida does his whole little calling himself out and making President Mike be annoyed by him and apologizing, they would all take the exam. Izuku, like I said, passed, and he's outside simply waiting for the proctor to let everybody do their thing. Eventually though, Izuku would get quite tired of being in the same spot, and so he would decide to move towards the front of the area. This is when a strange boy with blue hair would stop him and be like, "Hey, you're not supposed to go over there." Izuku would look at him and say, "What are you talking about? I'm just trying to get to the front." And Ida would say, "No, I know you're trying to distract that girl. Leave her alone." As Izuku looks at her and says, "Dude, back off," he would push Ida off of him, and Ida would get quite angry before saying, "I tried doing this the nice way, but if you're not going to cooperate, then I guess I'm going to have to use force." As he holds onto Izuku's shoulder and begins squeezing. Izuku would look to Ida as he simply says, "Just try it." But President Mike would say over the intercom, being like, boys, it's not time to fight. After all, go, go, go. He begins to tell everybody to just get ready. And then Izuku and Ida would look at each other before then rushing off, with Izuku actually matching Ida's speed as he's trying to show off and show Izuku that he's faster, but Izuku is actually keeping up. Ida would get quite angry at this, and Izuku would then go towards a robot as he activates Ultra Instinct and dodges out of the robot's way before coming in and counterattacking and essentially going on to do that with every single robot that he encounters, using his martial arts skills and super strength to pretty much be able to just destroy these robots as easy as possible. If you guys remember, let's see. As Izuku, who had more percentage of One for All when they went on the trip with David Shield on the movie My Hero Academia 2 Heroes, or was it My Hero? I don't know. But one of the movies where the villain was the guy who could manipulate metal, what ends up happening is essentially Izuku and Bakugo and Todoroki and them end up doing this like robot battle thing where they end up seeing how far they've progressed. Lo and behold, Izuku was actually able to destroy a ton of robots with a small percentage of One for All. So essentially Izuku using One for All would just go through, using martial arts as well as his Ultra Instinct to dodge out of every single one of the robot attacks, would pretty much begin acing everything, doing as well as he could possibly do, and eventually getting a total score of like, let's say 91 robot points, until eventually we would hear rumbling. Now, when Izuku hears rumbling, he would immediately turn towards the side where he hears a bunch of people running and screaming, and he would see a bunch of the hero students beginning to run away from a strange rumbling noise. Out of the corner of his eye, he notices a girl underneath some rubble screaming for help, and it's as if Izuku activated Ultra Instinct in that same moment. He begins rushing in, and the only thing that he sees is Uraraka. As the robot is just about to step over her, Izuku activates full cowling as fast as he possibly could, pushing it to his new heightened state, which is now 25%. And he begins rushing as fast as he could, as in an instant, Deku hits the rumble off of Uraraka, grabs her and gets her out of the way before he then runs to the side of a building and begins jumping on top, side to side to side, leaping off of it in American Ninja Warrior style, to the point where he finally makes it to the top, puts Uraraka down and asks her if she's okay. She would inform him that her ankle's a little hurt, and Izuku puts her on his back, like piggyback riding style, as he begins to pretty much jump from building to building until he finally makes it to Recovery Girl, and that's when the exam would end. Izuku would be granted about 60 rescue points for that, and bringing his grand total score to 151 robot points, I believe it was. That said, Izuku after that would end up having to wait, just waiting. And since this time Izuku actually did destroy some robots, he's not exactly going to be thinking, oh my god, I didn't pass. Instead, he's actually really excited for the results, and so is Inko, knowing that her son this time around actually does have a quirk. That said, she would proceed to simply run into Izuku's room one day whenever the results ended up arriving. And she'd be like, Izuku, the results are here. Izuku would look at her and say, oh, great, mom. Well, come here. You just play him in front of both of us. And from here, we get clips of Izuku using his quirk and destroying robots. As Inko watches this, and she's like, wow, Izuku, I didn't know you were that strong. Izuku just is like, yeah, I've been training a little bit. And All Might would look to Izuku on the screen before saying he passed, that he got this many rescue points, yada, yada, yada. Eventually, Inko is like, I'm so proud of you, Izuku. What do we do to celebrate? Izuku says that he would like for her to make a pretty big feast, and she says, I'm on it. I'm gonna go shopping right now. She goes to get a bunch of groceries and makes Izuku's favorite dinner. And from here, the day would end, until eventually, Izuku would receive a text from All Might saying, sorry kid, I've been a little busy with my entrance to UA. As Izuku would look to the text, he ends up meeting All Might on Dagobah Beach, where All Might would express his gratitude for him taking the quirk and how far he's come, telling him that he needs to do his best at UA and go plus ultra, breaking his limits every time, telling him that while he has a very good grasp of his quirk now, he still has a long ways to go, and telling him that he'll be with him every step of the way. Izuku would be pretty happy, and they would go out for some ice cream before All Might would end up dropping Izuku off in this extremely luxurious giant car that Inko sees Izuku get out of, and she's like, Izuku, who was that? Izuku would look at her and say, oh, yeah, mom, sorry about it, but I never did quite introduce you to him, right? Inko's like, who? And All Might would step out of the car and be like, hello, Miss Midoriya. And she pretty much passes out. When she wakes up, she would see All Might and Izuku standing over her, and she's like, Izuku? Is that who I think it is? Izuku would look at her and say, yeah, mom, it's All Might. And from here, she's like, All Might? She's extremely ecstatic, just like Izuku would be. And from here, Izuku would be like, Mom, you're embarrassing me. Inko would be like, shit, get out of here, Izuku. Mom could never embarrass your son. From here, she would invite All Might in for some dinner, and Deku would end up briefing her on how he's been training with All Might for the past couple of months, with her being like, how come you never told me, Izuku? And excuse this noise because I'm about to move my chair. But she'd be like, why'd you never tell me, Izuku? And Izuku would be like, well, mom, I kind of wanted it to be a surprise, but I mean, at least I'm telling you now. Inko would be like, yeah, I guess. And from here, Izuku would go on to essentially just have a nice little dinner, and the very next day, he would get dropped off by All Might at UA, getting there about an hour early before class starts, being one of the first people to actually arrive in the classroom. When he does sit there, he simply just sits in the back area, and he's just waiting for the teacher to finally get up and start teaching them. Seeing Izuku was one of the only people to actually notice, Aizawa was sitting in the back in a sleeping bag. He would just sit there quietly on his phone, just scrolling through TikToks, scrolling through YouTube on this really nice guy Zether's channel, just subscribing, pressing the like button on all his videos, seeing as it helps with the algorithm. And he's doing his thing. And from here, people start to get into the classroom. Eventually, a kid by the name of Katsuki Bakugo would arrive, and when Izuku sees him, he simply sighs. He's just like, what are you doing here? Thinking that to himself, as Bakugo looks towards Izuku, gives him a scowl, and thinks to himself how a loser like him could have possibly gotten into the school. He sits down and doesn't really cause a scene until eventually Ida would come in and begin to reprimand him on, what he's doing with his feet and how this is UA property. You know what I mean? Bakugo would look to him as he would say, stop having such a stick up your ass, dude. Go sit down at your desk and leave me alone. I already have problems to deal with right now. As Ida would say, how dare you? But Bakugo would look at him and be like, get lost, loser. As from here, Ida would begin to argue with him, and eventually Aizawa would wake up to the commotion, saying it took you guys 8 seconds to get ready. Throw these on and meet me outside. The entire class would do so, and from here, Aizawa would end up tossing the ball towards Deku's direction, telling him to throw this. Izuku would say, so what are the rules? Aizawa looks at him and says, just stay in the circle, throw it as far as you can. I'm gonna track it. And from here, Izuku activates full cowling about 26%, pushing it a little further, throwing the ball as far as he possibly could, which I genuinely don't know what that would be. I mean, he throws it with 26% full cowling with his arm. I really don't know how far it is, but just know it's pretty far. As soon as the class sees this, they would begin to say, oh, that looks like fun. And from here, Aizawa turns to them before issuing the challenge of whoever's last is getting expelled. After hearing this, the entire class would switch tunes and they would be like, yo, that's not fair. You can't do that to us. But Aizawa looks at them and says, oh, and natural disasters are, and villains are fair. This world is full of unfairness, and it's your job to combat this unfairness. Before going on to have the rest of the little events go down. We start with the 50-meter dash. All right, as soon as Aizawa would tell everybody what's what, they would all just go to the 50-meter dash line, and from here, Izuku would clear this so damn fast that it's not even funny. He ends up getting 2 seconds in terms of the 50-meter dash. When it comes to the grip strength test, Izuku would actually end up squeezing it as hard as he can, almost shattering it, but not quite, seeing as his strength isn't quite all the way up there quite yet, but he ends up actually beating dupli arms in this event. The next one would be the standing long jump, and when it comes to this, Izuku would actually end up clearing the sandbox very, very easily. The next event being the ball throw, with Izuku pretty much getting the same score that he got the first time, and then they would have their final test, which is the long distance run, seated toe touch, sit-ups, and a couple of push-ups and stuff like that. Afterwards, the results would be posted, and the person who have actually ended up coming in last place would end up being, who should end up coming in last? I think Invisible Girl, because if we do keep it in mind, Invisible Girl is basically just a normal human. Mineta at least had that one event of the side-to-side step, so instead of Mineta being the one who gets expelled this time around, the person who they actually end up expelling from UA is Invisible Girl. However, what ends up happening is essentially Aizawa takes her away, tells her that she needs to step her game up or else she's really going to get expelled, and she comes back with tears in her face and a smile, but nobody could really tell. They think that she'd never return, but Aizawa ends up informing them that, oh yeah, she's right here next to him. Everybody would be like, oh, so you didn't expel her? And Aizawa would say she has potential, and with a quirk like hers, there's no way UA could just let somebody like that go. You guys, however, you in particular, he points to Mineta and says that he better get his act together, no more perviness. He heard about what happened in the changing rooms. Mineta would be terrified at this and say, I'm sorry. And from here, Aizawa would tell everybody that they're free to go home. Everybody would do so, and we would have an entire week worth of the entirety of UA just kind of doing their own thing, chilling, you know what I mean? Like, they're just vibing. And actually, no, not a whole week, but about 1 to 2 days worth of just normal school, hero training with Aizawa after it. You guys get the point. But eventually, on the 4th day of UA, they would end up being greeted to nobody in the classroom. When they walk in, they begin wondering, yo, who's gonna teach us today? Aizawa's never late. But suddenly, from the door, we hear All Might's All Might's theme music playing, as All Might would bust in the room being like, I am here, before the class would abruptly freak out and begin to be extremely ecstatic. From here, All Might would then begin to tell them all that he's going to be their teacher for the day, and Uraraka would actually ask if he's going to be expelling them like Aizawa will. And All Might would say, nah, that's just Aizawa, before he then clicks a button and all of their pro hero costumes would be revealed. Before All Might would say that to be a pro, you have to look like a pro. Before all of them go into their changing rooms and they're all greeted to All Might on the outside, where they then go on to pick their raffle tickets and see who exactly they're going to be fighting against. When it comes to Izuku's teammate, I'm still going to be keeping it as Uraraka, not because it's going to be the ship payoff, seeing as I don't really think I'm going to be doing a ship in this version, but, you know, nonetheless, it would end up being Uraraka. The next person who they actually have to fight against is going to be, hold on, let me click this random generator. It's going to be Kirishima. And then the other one is gonna be, let's see. Tokiyami. Okay, that's actually not bad. Tokiyami and Kirishima, hey, that's solid. But from here, you know, the teams are announced, and Kirishima and Tokiyami would actually be told that they're going to actually be the villains. From here, Izuku and Uraraka would decide that all they have to do is get a bomb. Easy enough. And from here, what they would end up doing is creating a plan to simply ambush them together. Izuku would ask Uraraka what her quirk can do and what the advantages of it are as well as the disadvantages are, and Uraraka would end up informing him of them, before Izuku says, alright, that's definitely interesting. Pretty sure they're going to move all the things that you can use to attack, so how are we going to do this? I'm not sure, but for now, let's just rush in, ambush them, and whatever happens, happens. Uraraka looks at him, she's like, right! And from here, Izuku and Uraraka would go up the stairs and climb up each and every level, checking each room to see if they're in there, until eventually they end up arriving to the room that they're looking for. Eventually, Kirishima and Tokiyami would both get ready. As Kirishima would harden, Tokiyami would use his Dark Shadow quirk, and they would say, "You're not getting this bomb," before Izuku would smirk and then activate full cowling, before then looking to them and saying, "Yeah, right," as he would rush in and immediately begin dodging all of Kirishima's blows, kicking him away with full cowling, sending Kirishima back. As from here, he ends up getting in front of Dark Shadow, who would hit Deku away, as Deku lost some concentration since he got a little too cocky. And from here, Izuku would roll on the ground as they would look towards Uraraka's direction, who would be scared and be like, Izuku, any time now for your plan would be good. As Izuku would get back up and rush in as he activates 25% full cowling this time and runs in. As from here, he ends up punching Dark Shadow a bunch of times over and over as much as he possibly can, activating Ultra Instinct so his aura could become hot and visible. And this would actually end up scaring Tokiyami away, with Izuku noticing, light, he's afraid of light. He rushes towards one of the walls and Kirishima would be standing in his way, saying, "You're not going anywhere," before Izuku would dodge out of the way of Kirishima's hit and break the wall, leading to a bunch of light coming in, weakening Kirishima just enough so that Izuku could end up actually fighting him and not having that much of a hard time. Kirishima would look at him before saying, "Damn, he figured out your weakness." And from here, they would both get distracted with Deku, as Deku looks at Uraraka, winks at her, and she rushes towards the bomb as she jumps up into the air and goes in to try to hug it. And unfortunately, Tokiyami and Kirishima would just watch as they're like, "No!" Alright, picking up where we left off the last part, Kirishima and Tokiyami had yelled, "No!" And eventually, she would get to the bomb. She grips it, and all you hear is All Might saying, "Hero Team wins!" as Kirishima and Tokiyami both just look like they look defeated. They both just accept that they just lost, and they look towards Izuku, who's at the moment just still in his fighting pose, who just barely ended up taking in the information. They look towards him and say that he's actually a great fighter, and they all dab each other up before then going over to the area where Momo proceeds to tell everybody that if there had to be an MVP, it was definitely Izuku Midoriya, saying that the villain team, while they did their best, they completely forgot to account for Uraraka just because she wasn't a fighter, and that inevitably costed them the match. This is when Kirishima and Tokiyami would walk into the room and they'd be like, "Yeah, basically that's what happened." As from here, what ends up going down is essentially everybody else has their matches. And after that happens, we essentially cut to Izuku going home, getting a text message from All Might messaging him to meet him on the beach yet again. Izuku would do so, and from here, All Might would question Izuku how far he's gotten over the past couple of days. And Izuku would say that he's definitely been training on his own, going to the gym and stuff like that without using his quirk, but he doesn't know how far he could possibly get just doing these normal training methods. With All Might explaining that pretty soon he's gonna go meet a certain somebody that he believes will help him progress leaps and bounds with his training. Izuku would be extremely excited at this, before All Might would say, "But Midoriya, I believe it's time for our daily spar." For All Might buffs up, and Izuku would say, "Oh yeah, now we're talking." He taps into full cowling, and before the battle could start, All Might would cough out blood, be like, before saying, "Yeah, never mind, I used up my whole time limit today." With Izuku saying, "Not again, All Might," and All Might would simply be like, "Sorry, young Midoriya," before they just decide that they're just gonna do some normal, like, All Might's just gonna teach him a couple of moves, Izuku's gonna copy them, and yeah, the day would come to a natural conclusion. Eventually, we cut to the day where they end up all picking their UA Clash rep, and eventually Izuku would actually be the one picked at the top, with him gladly accepting the role. And this time around, what ends up happening is when the reporters come in and break into UA and all that commotion ends up happening, Izuku's actually able to use his quirk to jump up onto the air and then go to the exit sign saying, "Yo, We're pro heroes. How could you guys call you guys future heroes if you're gonna be scared of some news reporters? Just look outside. Some news reporters just got into UA. That's all it is. Stop worrying. Before everybody's like, oh yeah, you know, that's kind of true. And Ida would just be sitting there floating because Uraraka touched him, and he's now like, okay, so clearly my moment to shine was taken. And Izuku would hop back down before everybody returned to the cafeteria, and the class 1A would end up saying that, you know, Izuku did a pretty good job, before they all end up agreeing that choosing him as class rep, the best choice they could have made, with Ida acknowledging this as well, saying that Izuku is actually going to be a great class rep, apologizing to Izuku for the way that they met, and saying that he hopes that they can become friends later on. With Izuku being like, oh yeah, totally dude, no hard feelings. Before all of them inevitably end up making it to class, where Aizawa would inform them about the USJ. Once he does this, he ends up passing a bunch of papers to everybody before telling them that they're going to be needing to have these signed by their parents. Once they see this, they're like, oh, I mean, sure thing. So when do we have to turn these in? Aizawa would tell them that on Friday, because Monday, they're going to be going to the USJ, with all of them saying, all right, sounds good. All of them would go home, you know, they get their permission slips line. A couple of them would turn it in the first day, a couple of them the second day, a couple of them the last day. And yeah, we're now going to cut to the day of the actual USJ event. Now, this all starts off like a normal UA classroom day, so I'm not going to cover anything until they finally end up arriving on the bus and they travel outside. Izuku tells them all, come on, let's go, for all of them rush out of the bus without any order or anything, but they would end up meeting the hero 13. And she would begin explaining how quirks are dangerous, yada yada yada. You guys get the point. Eventually, about 5 minutes when they enter the USJ, they would end up spotting a strange warp gate portal in the middle of the USJ. And once Izuku sees this, he would think to himself if that's a real villain or it's just like training practice. He would turn to Aizawa, who would immediately jump down to the huge sum of villains that are already present and say, 13, protect the students! But she could do nothing to stop Kurogiri, as, you know, he proceeds to essentially warp gate all of the students away, almost all of them. And 13 would be left with nothing but a couple. Izuku would inevitably be one of the students that actually got warp gated away. And what ends up happening is, actually, no, retcon that. Izuku would not get teleported away because he has Ultra Instinct. I think Izuku would slightly be able to get out of the way and dodge the attack, leading to Tsuyu and Mineta being the only people on the boat. How are they going to get out of that situation? Don't ask me, I don't know. But we're just going to ignore it and say that they figure it out somehow, because I just don't feel like covering that. I mean, Tsuyu and Mineta, they're background characters, but I also don't want them to die, just because, you know, if they die, then UA goes under a lot of pressure, and we know how that goes. But what ends up happening is essentially Ida ends up busting out of the place with the help of Sato and Kirishima breaking down the door. And from here, what ends up happening is 13 ends up using her quirk to try to cancel. Well, no, not try to cancel, but to try to defeat Kurogiri. Now, Kurogiri would do his absolute best, and he would inevitably end up, you know, kind of destroying this man. So, what ends up happening is essentially, Kurogiri, after finishing 13, notices that the kid ran away, and he teleports to Shigaraki's side, informing him that they don't have a lot of time and that he hasn't even spotted All Might. Shigaraki would begin scratching at his neck as Deku looks down towards the direction of Aizawa, as he would be thinking that Aizawa is definitely getting overwhelmed. He has to go down there and help. He jumps down there and gets side to side with Aizawa as he activates full cowling and begins fighting against the villains alongside Aizawa, making it a lot easier for him and taking a bunch of the toll off of the villains that actually have quirks. Izuku's able to quickly outpace them using his quirk of Ultra Instinct that he uses in brief flashes, so his aura would turn on and off, similar to when Goku fought against Frieza and used the Kaioken technique. And so, what ends up happening is essentially Izuku ends up bodying a couple of villains, and Aizawa would actually have a brief smile on his face, thinking that this Izuku kid definitely has a lot of potential, and that he fights very similar to a certain somebody that he knows. All Might. Before suddenly, we hear Shigaraki say, "Nomu, kill that guy," before the Nomu would rush in at Aizawa and punch this man away, sending him flying and breaking his left arm, before Aizawa would be crashing onto the ground and spin out of control, completely unconscious for a couple of minutes. Now, Izuku would look to the direction of the giant Nomu that stands before him as he would roar at the direction of Izuku, and he would simply look towards it before saying, "All right, this This is going to be a lot harder than I thought. He begins jumping in and out of all of the attacks of the Nomu and eventually ends up landing a blow on the Nomu, which Shigaraki would laugh out loud saying, "The Nomu has shock absorption," with Izuku simply thinking to himself that that's not good, before he then gets almost punched and barely gets nicked. And then he proceeds to dodge out of the way again and again for the next following minutes, until eventually Shigaraki's like, "I'm tired of this, Nomu, why can't you kill the brat?" Before eventually Izuku would actually end up dodging. As he's dodging a bunch of the Nomu's blows that he's just throwing in quick succession, a portal would appear behind Izuku, and it would be Shigaraki's 5 fingers that actually were about to touch Izuku. But he's able to bend his body mid-air, and Shigaraki actually ends up holding grasp of one of the Nomu's arms, causing it to begin pretty much decaying, until eventually Shigaraki would say, "No, Nomu, rip your arm off," and the Nomu would grab the part of its arm that still wasn't hit with the decay, as it would begin to pretty much rip it off, and it would grow an entirely new one. Izuku would then go on to continue dodging, as Shigaraki would begin scratching at his neck, being like, "Damn kid, he's not getting hit, and he's not hitting the Nomu back," getting extremely irritated by the progression of events right now, until eventually we hear All Might's theme music playing as he arrives and rips off his tie Superman style, before then saying, "Don't worry kids, I am here." And he then proceeds to jump down there and have that 1v1 solo against the Nomu, with Izuku saying that he tried his best, but the Nomu had shock absorption and regeneration and super strength, so it was a really hard battle for him, saying that he'll back him up, as Izuku and All Might would both end up fighting against the Nomu, and it would relieve a little bit of the stress off of All Might, until eventually he sends him flying out of the USJ after going plus ultra, and Shigaraki would still inevitably end up running away with Kurogiri, still of course being shot up by the hero snipe, and he would simply run away with the rest of the villains being taken into custody. What would end up happening following these events is essentially Izuku and All Might would both kind of be in agreement that could have gone really bad, and they would end up rushing towards the direction of Tsuyu and Mineta, who at this point were about to get ambushed by the villains, but the pro heroes were here, and they would handle them for them, leading to Tsuyu and Mineta being perfectly safe. That said, we end up having the cleanup scenario happen, and All Might would end up thinking that All For One must have been behind all of this, and All Might, you're damn right, but it wasn't necessarily All Might, more like Shigaraki. That said though, what ends up happening following this is they have a 1-week break off of school, which Izuku takes full advantage of and begins working on his physical body, raising his 1-for-all percentage to about 27%, seeing as it was only a week. So, with 27% full cowling being, the new thing for Izuku, he's getting a lot stronger as the days progress, and he ends up learning a couple of new moves during this time, such as Air Force, where he flicks his fingers and he shoots little beams of air at his opponents. He's about as strong as the Izuku that ended up fighting against Gentle Criminal, and that's pretty strong, I would say so myself. I'm not really sure how much percentage of 1-for-all Izuku had at that point, but I think around 26%, right? Okay, I just looked it up and turns out he only used about 15% against Gentle Criminal. So I'm going to say that he ends up, he still has 27%, but that was just a little off. That said though, what ends up happening is essentially Izuku at this point is now preparing himself for the UA Sports Festival, because that's something that All Might definitely would brief Izuku in on with a text, because he wasn't able to actually see Izuku for that week, seeing as he had to do a bunch of hero work, seeing as he had a week to do so, and he also had to be in contact with the police about the events that went down in the USJ, also with the capturing of the Nomu and stuff like that. It wasn't a lot of time for All Might to actually end up having a little mentor and student moment with Izuku as much as he would have enjoyed it. That said, what ends up happening from here is essentially Izuku would go back to class, and the event where the class 1B, general studies, stuff like that end up coming to class 1A's classroom and checking out the competition would still happen. Bakugo still is arrogant and tells them all to get lost, and he would end up looking towards Izuku's direction as he gives him a little bit of a snarl and he just walks off. From here, the day would go on like you guys would expect, and the very next day, the USJ would be going down. Izuku would actually be the one to give the speech this time, and Midnight would call Izuku up instead of Bakugo to actually go up there and tell the world that, he's gonna try his best. He would give some really inspiring speech, something corny but also inspiring at the same time, and people would begin cheering for Izuku. Following this, a bunch of the Class 1B students would, instead of hating Izuku more or hating Class 1A, would think that maybe it's just that one kid that's really annoying and, has attitude problems. But Bakugo doesn't care. Nonetheless, the first event would end up being the race, and what ended up happening from here is essentially Izuku would just get into the starting line, as Todoroki, as soon as the whistle is blown, would stomp his foot before ice would cover everything. And Izuku would just jump up into the air as the ice, it ends up being there, and Deku would end up pretty much trying to maneuver through the ice, which was a little difficult, but he ended up doing it through simply using his air force and breaking all the ice and shooting a bunch of people out of the way of his direction as he simply runs through, and he ends up seeing 3 giant 0-pointer robots. Once he sees these, he activates Ultra Instinct and 27% full cowling as he begins running through these 0-pointers, dodging, simply running up the arms of the 0-pointers as another 0-pointer came in and punched that 0-pointer in the arm, blowing it off, as Izuku would simply jump onto each 0-pointer until they would pretty much end up defeating themselves, hitting each other with their massive blows and such. That said, Izuku would end up passing them by and would end up catching up to Todoroki really quickly, before he inevitably ends up passing Todoroki by, and Todoroki would be pretty angry at this because he didn't think that Izuku was that fast. But yeah, he ends up using more ice and becoming faster, and Bakugo would be closing in on their tails extremely fast. Deku would eventually get to the area where there's ropes that help you cross these bridges to new rocks, and Deku would use his full cowling strength to simply jump across and leap from rock to rock, making it to the other point and eventually leading him to the landmine area, where he would actually see the first place area right in front of him. Eventually, however, Todoroki and Bakugo would notice that Izuku is just way too much ahead of them, and instead of trying to bicker with each other, they try to use their quirks and max them out as much as they can in order to catch up to Izuku. But Izuku would push full cowling to 30% and end up crossing the finish line a couple of seconds before Bakugo and Todoroki got the chance to. That said, this would lead to Izuku getting the 10 million point headband, and thus a bunch of people not actually wanting to team up with Izuku. Seeing as the events are kind of playing out similar to what they were in canon, I see no change in Izuku's team. So Tokiyami, Uraraka, Mei Hatsume, and Izuku are still going to be the team. And when it comes to the event of this, I don't really see a lot of things changing as well. Izuku still has the same team, the other teams are still the same. The only change that's actually going to happen in this version is towards the end when Todoroki grabs the headband from Izuku. Izuku's actually able to use Air Force Blast at a bunch of the other people, and so he keeps Todoroki at bay, and he also ends up punching Todoroki, almost sending him flying off of his thing. Bakugo would end up blasting off of his thing trying to grab Izuku's headband, but at the end of the day, Izuku's team was able to actually hold on to the headband this time around and actually go into things as the first place people. So that ends up actually changing the battles a little bit, but not exactly for Izuku. So only the other battles change, and since I won't cover them, they don't matter. But essentially, Izuku's fight with Shinso would still happen. And the way that I see this all going down is essentially after the cavalry battle would be over, Todoroki would mark Izuku as a target. Bakugo would tell Izuku that he better be glad he won this one event because he's gonna win the next, and that he better meet him in the finals, before looking towards Todoroki, not even acknowledging him, and bumping Izuku on the way out. Izuku would be told good job by his teammates and told that he did great, as Mei Hatsume would ask Izuku if he enjoyed her babies. Izuku was like, yeah, I guess. And from here, the first match would be announced. Shinso versus Midoriya. Okay, how is this gonna go down? Let me think. At first, I originally thought that Shinso was gonna win, but then I remembered Ultra Instinct lets Izuku's body move on its own whenever it's in danger. So here's what happens. Izuku gets into the battle area. Ojiro still warns him, but Izuku, being the dummy he is, he still ends up answering Shinso. Shinso smirks, thinking to himself that, he all but won this battle. Plot twist, Izuku's Ultra Instinct kicks in and he rushes towards Shinso's direction, using full cowling to simply blitz in and punch Shinso straight out of the stadium, sending him flying clean into the grass, as Shinso is shocked. He could have sworn he had Izuku under his mind control, but what good could that do when Izuku's body is able to move on its own? After Shinso gets hit onto the ground and he gets startled, his mind control breaks and Izuku notices what just happened, thinking to himself that could have gotten very bad if Izuku didn't have the quirk that he has. Before then, walking off and being informed of the next match, which is actually going to be Todoroki versus Izuku Midoriya. Before that match could start, All Might would look towards Izuku before he tells him that he wants him to let the world know that he is here. Izuku nods to him, and Todoroki, seeing All Might and Deku talk, would ask him if he's some sort of secret love child of All Might. For Izuku, instead of his initial reaction that he had in canon where he's like, no Todoroki, I'm not. Instead, what ends up happening is Izuku, after hearing this from Todoroki, would go into an abrupt laughter. And Bakugo would be hearing this all going down, thinking to himself that of course he isn't some secret love child. It's not even how his quirk works. Before Izuku just laughs at Todoroki, and Todoroki gives him a death stare telling him not to act like he's a fool, with Izuku saying he's sorry but that's the dumbest theory he's ever heard, before saying that he better be ready for the next part of, their battle. And Todoroki would walk off, looking to Bakugo as he just looks at him and says, you heard that, didn't you? And Bakugo would smirk saying, love child, before Todoroki goes off and says that he better hope that Izuku's able to defeat him, because if not, he's gonna freeze him in that battle. And so Bakugo would simply just be like, whatever. As from here, he walks away, and Deku was simply left there to think about what Todoroki just said, before saying he's glad he didn't exactly find the connection, but the idea was definitely there. That said, what ends up happening is essentially Izuku goes to the waiting room, and he ends up running into Endeavor just like he would in the original. Endeavor would end up asking Izuku to actually make Todoroki, his son, use his fire side, and Izuku would ask why he wants him to use his fire so bad. Why doesn't he just tell him that? With Endeavor saying that it's none of his business, and Izuku would look to him before saying, if it's none of my business, then I'm not gonna help you. Endeavor would growl at this, and Izuku would walk off just nonchalantly with his hands in his pockets as he walks towards the arena, and Shoto would look towards Izuku as he would say, you better get ready to get frozen solid, with Izuku saying, I doubt it. He would stretch, activate full cowling, and as soon as Todoroki would stomp on the ground and shoot a giant geyser at Izuku's direction, Izuku leaps out of the way, dodging the attack, and then says, too slow. Alright, before I get into this, I just have to preface this by saying that it's been about 2 days since I recorded the last part of the series, so I might be a little rusty when it comes to the material and things, and some things that I say might just genuinely not be right. And the reason for that is because I refuse to go back and watch like 1 hour of content just to be kept up. I know I left off with Deku and Todoroki fighting, so we're just gonna pick off here. And if you're here for the movie experience, then welcome. I'm extremely unprofessional, and it'll always be like that. Anyways though, hopping back into the fight, Deku would be like, too slow, as Todoroki just looks at his direction and then proceeds to, kind of have like this growl look on his face. Deku from here would simply activate full cowling as he rushes towards the direction of Todoroki, and he would shoot an ice geyser right at the direction of Deku. Deku would jump to the top of it before then smashing his fist at the very top of it, and then kind of like planting himself with the ice. From here, Izuku would do a backflip and begin sliding down the wall of ice all the way towards Todoroki, as Todoroki would be shocked, being like, how did he? And Deku would get shot with more ice by Todoroki as mid-air he changes trajectories, lands behind Todoroki, keep that in mind, behind him, and proceeds to hit him with the 1-2 combo, sending Todoroki flying back on his butt straight on the ground, with him having to catch himself with his ice before Deku simply would walk up over to him, and Todoroki, in a moment of like desperation, would shoot his fire side towards the direction of Deku. Deku, seeing this, would immediately dodge out of the way as Endeavor would begin yelling out, Shoto! Being extremely excited as he would have in the original. However, the main difference here is Izuku's not about to go over to him and be like, oh my god, what's wrong? Why are you not? Nope, none of that. He simply looks at Todoroki, who's already pretty much defeated himself psychologically, before going to him and kicking him one good time square in the jaw, sending him flying out of the arena and crashing through the ice barrier that he laid. As Deku, from here, would be laid to be the winner. And following this, Izuku would have one last opponent to face. Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood bully. Ever since Izuku could remember, Bakugo's been picking on him since he was a kid and discovered his quirk. Things just changed. One day they were hanging out, and while Izuku wasn't exactly the bestest friend of Bakugo and he may have never always been the nicest, Bakugo was a childhood friend of his. But after Izuku got his quirk, Bakugo started, instead of looking down on him, being angry at him all the time. He never understood why, but I guess now he finally gets to have a bit of closure by beating Bakugo. That said though, what would end up going down is essentially everybody would have their own matches until eventually the finals would come down. Now the final match would be between Katsuki Bakugo and Todoroki, or no, not Todoroki, but Midoriya. So what I end up seeing happening here, realistically, is Izuku, he does his things, he's in the waiting area, he gets like congratulated by all his friends and stuff. Inko would definitely make sure to send him a call. He'd be like, Izuku, you better make sure to be safe, yada, 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 yada. While, Bakugo would simply just be like sitting there in the dark, like with his hands crossed or something, like thinking to himself how he's going to beat Deku, knowing about Izuku's dodging quirk. So that's already going to be a problem for Bakugo. However, he has been training on a special move that should get under Izuku's skin. So he's pretty much just preparing himself mentally, and eventually the time would come where they would both meet each other in the arena. Izuku would look towards Bakugo before asking, this is going to determine who's stronger, me or you. And I just hope that there isn't that many hard feelings when I wipe the floor with you. Bakugo would smirk before saying, you always were cocky right after you got your quirk, but I'm going to put you back in your place. You're nothing but a quirkless Deku before, and now you're going to be worthless, even with a quirk. As Bakugo looks towards the direction of Deku, and Deku would get into his fighting stance saying, I'm ready then. Activating full cowling, as Bakugo would simply watch as Izuku's aura would change. He would get that same Omen Ultra Instinct aura around himself as Bakugo would begin questioning how he's going to make this happen. He would keep his distance and Deku would charge in. Bakugo would shoot an explosion, sending himself into the air as in a flash with using one arm, he would keep himself blasted in the air, as with the other one, he would begin charging up an AP shot as he would shoot multiple blasts at Deku's direction. Deku would dodge them all effortlessly and Bakugo would just think to himself, damn, he dodges those too. He lands down on the ground and begins saying he's not going to be able to dodge these. He runs in towards Deku and begins shooting full powered explosions at the direction of Deku, which Deku would essentially just be standing there and like slightly moving out of the way of these explosions that are massive, keep in mind. These are not some baby explosions that he can simply dodge and weave. No, Deku had to like jump and leap in strides to dodge these attacks. So Deku would do just that. And so Bakugo after everything would be like, that should have got him. But Deku would simply look as soon as the smoke would clear, he would flick his fingers and all the smoke would be blasted away as Bakugo's eyes would widen and say, how did you? But Deku would rush in and begin to pound on this man Bakugo, sending a punch straight to the side of Bakugo's face. From there, he would send a knee to Bakugo's stomach, send an uppercut to his face, and then do a flip kick in the air as he would knock Bakugo down to the ground. Bakugo would get extremely angry at this before he turns around and shoots a full power explosion at Deku, which Deku like kind of Matrix style dodges. And from here, he looks towards Bakugo before saying, that's it, Bakugo, you're done. Give up. And from here, Bakugo would look at him with an angry expression as Izuku charges up two fingers and flicks his Air Force attack at him, sending him flying off the stage, leading to Izuku Midoriya being announced as the winner. Following these events, we have Izuku ended up cheering with his classmates, and everybody would pretty much be having a good time, except for the exclusions of Todoroki and Katsuki, since Bakugo's mad and Todoroki's salty about what went down, and he still hasn't gotten over his daddy issues, so he's not even going to be going to Endeavor for his pro hero agency. Instead, he's going to go to somebody else just to spite him, the number 3 hero, whoever that is. That said, though, Izuku would end up getting the medal and being told that he did a great job, and people would overall be extremely happy with the results of this year's UA Sports Festival. That said, what ends up following after this is Izuku would just, he goes out to eat with his mom Inko, they have a pretty good day, and his dad calls him up being like, what's good, sport? Like, you did a great job, yada yada, as you guys would expect. That said, the very next day at school, when Izuku would report to the class, Aizawa would just be sitting there sleeping in his bag as usual, and Uraraka walks over to Deku being like, hey Deku, that was some performance back there. Izuku smiles and says thank you for, the good wishes, and then he looks to Uraraka before telling her that, she actually did amazing against Bakugo, saying that it was a shame that she couldn't pull it through, but he was proud of her. Uraraka would simply be like, oh, thanks. And from here, everybody would be informed of the fact that they need to pick their hero names, as well as also needing to pick who they're going to be going for in terms of their agencies. Now, when it comes to hero names, I want you guys to actually comment it down below with a hashtag and then the hero name that you guys want in all caps. Whoever it is that I pin on the comment for today is going to be the winner, and you get like a cookie, I guess. All right, a virtual cookie is your prize. That said though, comment away, and whoever wins. Best of luck. That said though, when it comes to Izuku's agency and stuff like that, keep in mind part 1 when I had explained to you guys that Izuku would inevitably end up meeting Gran Torino. Yep, this is the arc. And keep in mind how this time Shigaraki actually was able to get away. Yeah, that means Hosu City, Stain, and the Nomu incident is actually going to be happening in this series. Something that never at all happens in most of my other series. But before we can get into that, I have to cover Izuku and All Might talking to each other and discussing Gran Torino. This time around, All Might would definitely explain to Izuku why he's so scared of him and the things that, Gran Torino did to him while they were training. Izuku would be kind of scared of Gran Torino just based off of these tales that All Might would tell him, and the day that he would finally arrive after getting off of the train, Izuku walks in, knocks at the door, and just lets himself in. But when he walks in, he sees Gran Torino laid down on the floor with ketchup on him, and he's passed out. Izuku immediately rushes to him using full cowling, asking, "Old man," tapping him in the face, being like, "Old man, are you okay? Are you okay?" He immediately whips out his phone and begins dialing 911 before Gran Torino begins chuckling, saying, "Toshinori's told me you were like this." And, he gets up and Deku's like, "You're alive?" And Gran Torino's like, "Of course I'm alive. What do you think I am, a fossil? I mean, I might look like one, but this old bag still got a couple of moves left to show," before he then begins using his jet quirk to blast around and try to hit Izuku. Except upon the first hit that Gran Torino tries to land on Izuku, it's as if Izuku simply dodged out of the way effortlessly. Gran Torino was not able to touch this man. From here, Izuku's closed his eyes, activated full cowling 5%, and it was as if it was child's play for Deku. He just began dodging out of the way in full Goku fashion. And as soon as Gran Torino saw that, he would be quite shocked, thinking to himself that his quirk is way more impressive than what he would have ever imagined. He never thought somebody along these lines could ever exist, always thinking that Tsunade was going to be the best at dodging his attacks, but this kid, he makes it look effortless. He's not looking forward in time, his body's just moving on his own. It's incredible. Following this, Gran Torino pretty much just gives up his assault on Midoriya, understanding he's not going to hit him. And so he would pretty much end up telling Izuku that that was one good workout, before then revealing that Gran Torino ended up smashing his microwave in that onslaught, looking to Izuku and becoming very angry at that, saying, "You smashed my microwave," with Izuku being like, "Dude, I just stayed in the same spot practically. I just dodged your hits. You never even told me I was going to be having a dodge." And Gran Torino said, "Whatever, boy, let's go get some snacks." From here, he goes to buy his candy fish thing or whatever it is that he likes, a microwave, and Izuku just sticks back home. He really is just chilling there. He sits there reading a couple of magazines, and Gran Torino would eventually walk in the room. What ends up happening following that would essentially be that for the next couple of 3 days, I suppose is a good amount of number, Gran Torino and Deku would simply work on his one-for-all usage and how things have been going with Toshinori, aka All Might. And Izuku would explain that things have actually been going great. All Might is a phenomenal teacher. He teaches them things that he never thought he would have ever had the opportunity to learn. Not only that, but the quirk of one for all actually helped his own personal quirk advanced, with Gran Torino being like, "Oh, so you did have a quirk before this." Izuku would say, "Of course he did." And from here, Gran Torino would ask how exactly his quirk works, asking if it has anything to do with that dodging ability. Izuku would say that that's precisely it, explain it to him, and from here, Gran Torino would ask Izuku why he hasn't gone up in more percentages when it comes to full cowling, asking him what's holding him back. Izuku would question this, being like, I don't really know. And for the next couple of hours, if not 2 days, he would pretty much just spend that time wondering to himself why he can't surpass this barrier of simply 27%. He should at least be at 40 from what he sees. Look at his body type, it's shredded. Izuku would wonder this, and for the next couple of days would simply end up trying to figure this out, realizing that it was sort of a mind block. For some reason, Izuku kind of had it in the back of his mind that he never truly wanted to surpass All Might. But now that he realized it, this mind block was gone. And now Izuku now has full access to that of 40% of full cowling now, with the fact that he now realized that he needs to become his own hero. Not like All Might, he needs to use his quirk as if it's his own, and not a gift, not something that should be idolized or looked at as the greatest thing in the universe. Izuku now knowing this and having this thought would become a greater hero overall. And the day would eventually come when Gran Torino and Izuku go out for night patrol at Hosu City. Just like in the original, a gigantic flying Nomu would bust in on the train and Gran Torino would kick it off using his jet quirk. Izuku, seeing this, jumps through the hole that Gran Torino left behind, and as he's falling onto the ground, Izuku would use a quirk that he had never thought could be possible. He didn't know that One For All came with extra quirks. He would use Black Whip. And from here, Izuku would catch himself on a light pole before swinging himself back up and thinking to himself, how did I... But Ultra Instinct is on and his body is, like I said, moving on its own. Izuku has no thought process of what's going on. Izuku's body is just doing things naturally. And with that block out of his head, Izuku is now able to not only access 40% consciously, but fully access a grand total of 70%, moving at speeds even greater than All Might in his prime. Listen to that, All Might in his prime. Keep in mind, Ultra Instinct is something that lets your body move on its own subconsciously. Whenever he tries using full cowling, he thinks about it too hard, thinking about the egg not exploding in the microwave, keep that in mind. But with this body just using whatever it can use, it's now using it at full optimization. Like he's doing things fully optimal. You know what I mean? Like my man JPG Coaching, in case you guys know who that is, but you might not, you might. But anyways, essentially Izuku would proceed to blow by the Nomu and arrive right in front of it, with Gran Torino being far behind. And Izuku, as soon as he arrives to it, would punch the Nomu straight through a building before the Nomu would screech out in pain, and Izuku would land right on top of it, beginning to essentially pound the Nomu's face in until he grabs it by one of the wings and sends it flying as high as he possibly can, literally into the next city. From here, Izuku would look to Gran Torino as Gran Torino would smile and think that All Might made the singular most perfect decision he could have possibly made. This kid is a monster. He is a beast. And that's just putting it lightly. I mean, Izuku hasn't even reached his full potential, but the things that he's displaying right now, it's insane. That said though, the Ida situation, it's happening. Ida currently just got stabbed in the back, and Izuku would begin thinking back to Ida and his whole situation. And once he thinks about this, he's like, wait, Ida, you went to Manu, the hero killer. I've read about it on the way here. He begins running towards alleyways, just running as fast as he can, looking to reach in every single one. And right as Stain was about to stab into Ida, Izuku jumps in the way and kicks the knife right out of Stain's hand, grabbing the hero native and Ida, both respectively, throwing them on top of the roof as Izuku lands back down in front of Stain, and Stain would look at him before licking his blade, causing Ida to be paralyzed like usual. And from here, Izuku would say that he's not going to be harming anybody else for the rest of his life, as Stain would say that the only person who's allowed to put him down is a true hero like All Might. Izuku would look at him before saying, well then I guess it's lucky that I'm his successor, before blitzing by him and knocking him out in just awesome anime fashion. He blitzes by him and he holds one arm up as Stain's body just falls flat to the ground, and this man is then had to pick up by a hospital cruiser thingy-majigger that would send him straight to Tartarus. This time he doesn't end up puncturing his lung or anything, or even having that iconic moment where Toga, Dabi, Spinner, and the rest of the other villains who end up joining due to Stain's influence even happening when it comes to the League of Villains. So they end up losing out on a bunch of members, but from here Izuku would actually be one of the main people and key players to actually taking out the Nomus, right as Endeavor would have arrived. Keep in mind, he doesn't get there with Shoto, and Izuku essentially is simply there to help out with the taking out of the Nomus, which results in Gran Torino actually being extremely proud of Izuku, and Izuku being a huge helping hand when it comes to the Nomu cleanup. The city would thank Izuku, and just like usual, Endeavor would be the one to ultimately receive credit for the taking down of all those Nomus. Even though we all know rightfully so, the credit should have all gone to Izuku Midoriya. but it's life, things ain't fair, and so is this episode. That said though, speaking of episode, if you guys are actually watching this on part 4, I'm going to be dropping a Naruto What If really soon, and it's going to be called What If Naruto Had a Part 2 release. If you guys want to check that out, there probably might be a link out by the time that this goes out. Okay, because part 2 came out today, which is Thursday. Part 3 comes, no, it won't be out. It'll be out on Saturday though. But yeah. Anyways though, back into the story. Everybody else would end up finishing their internships, and just like many of you guys were probably expecting, Izuku would essentially just kind of go back. I mean, there's no real events to cover. Shigaraki never ends up getting a couple of extra members, and when they all go back and are told about their final exams and stuff like that, it ends up taking place. I'm pretty sure we can all agree that the final exams arc is boring up to the point where they actually have to face the teachers, and nobody really wants to hear about any of the extra battles. So we're essentially just gonna skip through all of the all the formalities and go straight to the Izuku and Bakugo team up fight against Bakugo. Now we know Izuku in this version and Bakugo aren't exactly on the best terms, or even on as good of terms as they were in the original, due to Izuku this time actually outclassing Bakugo. He's a lot more salty and isn't prepared to listen to a single thing that Izuku would say when he's trying to basically help them win. Bakugo would tell him that he's just an extra and he has no right to, tell him what to do. Water break. Some good water. Before, rushing off and going over to try to fight All Might himself. But as we saw in the original, that didn't play out too well for Bakugo, did it? The man ended up getting kneed in the jaw, kneed in the stomach, and flung around like an absolute ragdoll. All Might manhandles this man Bakugo in the original, and I see no reason why he wouldn't do the same in this version. So, Bakugo, I'm sorry to say this, but rest in peace! And, eventually Izuku comes in to the picture, and All Might would look at him with a smile before saying, "Young Midoriya, I hope you're able to put up more of a challenge than usual." Izuku would instantly power up Ultra Instinct, Omen, mind you, and he would then look towards the direction of All Might before saying, "You have no idea." He closes his eyes and from here taps into 70% full cowling for a brief second before just looking at All Might would end up kind of rattling himself as that thought comes back into his mind, and he's only able to push it towards 40%, thinking to himself, "Damn it, why does this always happen? I need to get past this. This is the day where this changes. I need to stop idolizing All Might and just view him as another hero. He may be my trainer, but this is a roadblock I have to overcome. Midoriya, are you done fooling around?" Izuku would look at him and say, "Oh, I'm done alright, All Might. I'm done." As from here, Izuku charges up his power through his body and Ultra Instinct Omen would activate. As Izuku blitzes towards the direction of All Might, who instinctively throws a punch, a very powerful one at that, holding nothing back, trying to see just where exactly his pupil stands in terms of both of their powers. And All Might would be shocked to find out that this time it didn't graze Izuku, it didn't even get near him. Izuku quite literally was able to dodge clean out of the way with such precision and speed that it almost seemed as if he just was never there in the first place. All Might looks back only to see Izuku standing there, and he just is confused before suddenly his body registers what had just happened. Like 17 hits would be planted on his face, and All Might would be flying, crashing into a building, as All Might would pick himself back up and wonder how fast he was moving. He didn't even perceive Izuku moving. He's using 75% one for all full cowling, mind you. And if we put that into perspective, that's even faster than Prime All Might. Just due to the fact that one for all gets even faster as, no, not even faster, but grows even more powerful from user to user. So Izuku is pretty much way more powerful than 100% full Prime All Might at this point, just using 75% of it perfectly, mind you, because his body is doing things on his own without him having to think about these things. So Izuku is pretty much fighting perfectly against All Might, countering each and every single one of his attacks, and All Might is pretty much being made look like fodder. Everybody who is watching this on the cameras would be shocked at how fast Izuku's moving, and the camera perception would actually have to be slowed down for everybody to be able to keep up with this, due to the fact that All Might and Izuku are moving at speeds that it's hard for them to track. So they're actually moving at slow motion so that the class could see how fast they're actually moving. And Bakugo at this point would barely begin waking up as he just looks up to see these flashes and this heat coming off of Izuku. It's radiating off of him. Bakugo would grit his teeth, say, "Damn Deku, always surpassing me. You can't ever just stay like things were, huh? You always have to get stronger." From here, he looks towards Deku, who at this point lands one final blow on All Might and would send him back flying after having dodged everything. And All Might would essentially be taken out completely. All Might was not about to get back up from something like that, and Izuku and everybody else watching knows it. So Izuku would then be crowned the winner of the event as he would grab Bakugo, restrain All Might, and take Bakugo to the recovery girl. He would toss Bakugo over his shoulder, and Bakugo would tell him to put him down, that he doesn't need his help, as he begins to weakly wobble towards recovery girl, and everybody would go over towards Izuku and begin pretty much telling him that he is the best, praising him as much as they possibly could. And after this, everybody would pretty much be extremely excited at what's to come, because what is to come is actually going to be very interesting. In about 1 week's time, they're going to be going to the forest training arc, and Aizawa already had everybody get their permission slips lined, so everybody that passed and everybody who failed is going to be going regardless, with those who failed having to take remedial courses at the actual forest training camp on top of their already strenuous training, not chaining, but yeah. That said, the group of Class 1A entirely would end up deciding that they actually want to do something before they go. They all want to go out shopping together, and nobody's really opposed to that idea. I mean, it's a great idea overall. Everybody gets to hang out a little bit, they get to buy the things that they need, and it's honestly just going to be a pretty cool bonding experience for that of Class 1A. So everybody agrees, and they then go on the little day. Eventually, everybody would go off on their own, and Uraraka and Izuku would be the only two left behind. Izuku would simply be walking with Uraraka as, they're about to go to some random shop to just see whatever they can find, when suddenly, Izuku's Ultra Instinct quirk just immediately activates, and a man with a black hood over his head would almost grab Deku as he holds him by the arms. And if you guys don't remember what's going on, it's essentially when Shigaraki grabbed Deku by the neck. That's what's going on, except this time, Ultra Instinct, Izuku was able to actually dodge out of the way this time, leading to Shigaraki's hand completely missing the mark, and Izuku being able to dodge what was about to happen to him anyways, then going on to grab him by the wrist and hold it in a position that would literally snap it like a twig if Shigaraki begins trying to move. He then plays it off as if they're just messing around, and he proceeds to walk Shigaraki towards a direction with him, with Uraraka following along. They would end up going to a spot where not a lot of people are there, and Izuku would ask him what he thinks he's doing here, with Shigaraki saying, "Let me go, you damn brat." And Izuku would say, "I don't think I will. You're one of the main leaders of the League of Villains, at least. I know about your boss. You're just a small fry. So I think it's better to just get to the boss up right now than have to deal with you for another couple of months and your weird, wacky plans." Before he then proceeds to essentially whack this man Shigaraki on the back of the neck, knocking him out for the entire day until the police and authorities would arrive and essentially dump Shigaraki off at Tartarus. This would definitely rub One For All for One the wrong way, because now his successor is essentially in jail. So the prison breakout arc actually ends up happening a lot sooner than it does in canon, due to Izuku having Ultra Instinct. Yet another awesome change that this version of Ultra Instinct, who is the MVP, ended up contributing to. This would end up happening earlier than later, just due to the fact that, they are going to be doing the forest training arc ambush, and they want Shigaraki to be present there. So All For One ends up sending a bunch of troops and actually ends up losing a couple of villains who would actually get captured, but all in all, they would actually end up gaining back more people than they lost, because not only do they break out Shigaraki, they break out other high tier prisoners with very, very powerful quirks that are going to replace Dabi, Toga, Spinner, and all others who joined due to the influence of Stain. Because keep in mind, that doesn't happen this time. So it kind of ends up evening things out, and we kind of have the heroes being on high alert, with the media actually portraying the heroes as unable to pretty much hold their own when it comes to these villains, saying that these heroes are not doing what is asked of them. I mean, they're not contributing as much as they would like. At this same time, simultaneously, Izuku during this next week would be discovering new quirks that he never thought he could have possibly had that come along with One For All. And these quirks range from a variety of, spoiler warning really quick, a variety of Black Whip, Float, Danger Sense, Smoke Screen, Fajin, which is basically just Kaioken, and an unknown quirk, which is the last one that he's going to get, I believe, presumably when he unlocks 100%. But seeing as now, currently in the manga, Izuku has access to about 50, and he already has access to multiple of these quirks, I think that it's a safe amount of time to give Deku access to these other, streamlined versions of One For All in terms of the Forest Training Camp. And that's what Izuku is essentially going to be working on. Essentially, the Forest Training Camp, I don't believe is going to be changing too much. I mean, Izuku has more power now, but does that really affect their bus ride there or their path to making it after getting dumped off by the heroes on the mountainside? I don't think so. So that's why we're kind of just going to be skipping the middleman and jumping straight to when they actually end up arriving at the base and once they all start training. Everybody would do what they would have done in the original, and the situations with Koda and Izuku kind of getting to know Koda's backstory would still end up happening just like in the original. Is it happening naturally? Yeah, because things don't really change due to Izuku's quirk. The only thing that changes is Izuku's training regimen. He ends up working more instead of on One For All or his own Ultra Instinct quirk, more on these other, variant versions of One For All, due to the fact that he wants to be able to be proficient at using these quirks. So essentially, Izuku begins working on Black Whip with Sero, works on Float with Uraraka. Danger Sense is something he can basically use as if it's already part of his Ultra Instinct quirk, because now Izuku essentially has a more OP version of Ultra Instinct that can essentially alert him even when he's not using the Ultra Instinct state. He also has Smoke Screen, which can help him kind of like cover an area of battle and sneak up on people, and Fajin, which increases his already insanely powerful state times 2. So yeah, it's pretty broken. Not only that, but I really want to give him the first quirk, which is something that I'm going to be making up, and you guys are going to see what it is later. But I think that you guys should genuinely be happy with my choice that I end up going with. That said, what ends up happening is essentially the Forest Training Camp essentially goes, I need to stop saying essentially so much, but it ends up going basically like it does in the original. Koda still falls, the girls still try to get peeped on by Mineta, Koda ends up having that situation with Deku, and the Forest Training Camp attack what ends up still happening at the nighttime, one day after what it was supposed to happen. So I guess that is the one and only change that happens to the series, but essentially Izuku still ends up being there right at the perfect moment when the villain known as Muscular arrives and begins trying to put this man Koda on her t-shirt. When this happens and Muscular arrives, revealing himself out of the shadows, I believe Izuku would end up definitely covering Koda and being like, Koda, get out of here. I have to talk with a friend. Koda would look up to see Muscular and say, that's him. He's the guy who killed my... And Izuku understands exactly what he means. This is the man that took Koda's innocence from him. And when Izuku hears that, this man Izuku's not having any of it. He gets angry and immediately proceeds to tell Koda that he can stay for this, because he knows that if he was in his position, he would love to witness something like this happen someday. Izuku activates Ultra Instinct as well as Full Cowling, and using Black Whip would grab onto Muscular as he drags him towards himself, and then uses Float to pick them both up into the air, spin him in the air, and smash him into the side of the mountain. Then, jumping from above, activating Fajin to essentially land on Muscular using a full power 70% full smash on Muscular that would end up just destroying this man. It's bad. He gets absolutely obliterated, and when Koda watches all this go down, he is just shocked. When it comes to all of the other villains that would have attacked in the original, essentially the only changes that really happen here are the villains that the teachers fight. Since Dabi is not going to be present there, Twice doesn't end up making a Dabi clone. He makes a clone of something else. Since Toga isn't there, she's not the one who actually ends up fighting against Uraraka and Tsuyu. It's another weak female villain that isn't able to kill them, but definitely does damage them. And so when they end up arriving in front of Bakugo, Todoroki, and the group essentially assembles just like they would in the original canon, that still ends up going just like many of you guys would expect. Tokiyami and Bakugo are still compressed by Mr. Compress, and Izuku is still the one who's essentially present when that happens. Him noticing earlier than he does in the original, just due to the fact that he has danger sense, is able to actually follow Mr. Compress way faster than he does in the original. And when Mr. Compress essentially ends up making his way towards the villains, he isn't fast enough to essentially keep up and make it to them. So he ends up throwing the marbles towards the direction of new villains that All For One would have sent on this mission. They catch it, and Izuku would use Fajin just for a moment, since it is strenuous on his body, since it pretty much heightens the abilities of full cowling, and it really is like extremely strenuous on his body. It damages him a lot. But he uses it for just an instant to jump into the portal which Kurogiri and all the other villains would have been in. And when he pops back out, he would see Bakugo and Tokiyami, who are both at this moment pretty much unconscious. And when Izuku sees this and turns around to look at all these villains that are there just present, Izuku would wonder to himself how he's going to make it out of this, before thinking to himself that he has the most perfect quirk for this situation. Using his quirk of smokescreen, he would fill up the entire room, which is the villain league hideout, and he would then begin using danger sense as well as ultra instinct to instinctively dodge and attack back at every single villain that was there, pretty much rendering them all useless, because every attack that they would shoot at him, they wouldn't be able to see things. So eventually they would end up using friendly fire to take each other out, as well as Izuku using his own physical strength and brute force as well as martial arts tactics to actually take them all out themselves. This would eventually lead to a portal opening, which would reveal the main villain of the story, All For One, and when he does reveal himself, he comes out clapping, telling Midoriya that he did quite a good job, telling him that now he's going to be taking his quirk and everything else that he loves, before then teleporting all of the villains that were there present as well as Shigaraki away from the area, and then looking towards the direction of Bakugo and Tokiyami, who at this point are still knocked out. Izuku would end up telling All For One that no, he's not touching them, blitzing before him and trying to hit him, but All For One would put up a barrier quirk right in front of himself so that Izuku essentially can't hit him, and then using an air quirk would blast Izuku away straight out of the building, leading to All For One having enough time to teleport Bakugo and Tokiyami away, just long enough for Izuku to be pretty angry at the situation. He would rush in using his 75% one for all state, and All For One would begin using the multitude of quirks that he has to essentially give him the upper hand in this battle. Izuku, using Ultra Instinct, is able to actually dodge out of everything, but him not being able to actually hit All For One would end up pretty much causing strain on Izuku's body, because while Izuku is still very OP, the one thing that has always been a catalyst for Izuku's growth and potential as a hero has been his time that he can use the ability of Ultra Instinct, the time that he can have full cowling activated for 75%, which isn't much. This time would only be that of like 5 minutes, and he already pretty much used up most of it when fighting Muscular, when helping out the squad, when chasing after Bakugo and Katz and what's his name? Dark Shadow guy, and now he used it against fighting the villain. So Izuku only has about a minute left to try to make the best use of this thing. And this is a bad thing, because Izuku is in a horrible situation where he either needs to make it happen now or it's not going to happen at all. He tries using his multitude of quirks against All For One, but All For One, just being genuinely smarter and in a better position than Izuku in terms of mental state, is able to kind of outplay Izuku with mind tricks and the multitude of quirks that he has, leading to Izuku having to fight this uphill battle that Izuku just was not going to win. And before many of you guys begin wondering why this is so hard for this Izuku, remember, he still isn't perfect at any of his quirks. He still has that doubt in his mind, and with him being backed up into the wall, it only increases. Izuku eventually, his one for all output percentage only goes down to that of 40%. The maximum that he could currently handle now. Not only that, but his 75% gone. Izuku won't be able to tap into that for a while now, because he burnt himself out, and now Izuku is essentially trying to fight an uphill battle using only 40%, which even All Might could take him out using. So just imagine the villain that's pretty much even stronger than All Might fighting against somebody like that with multiple quirks and more abilities that he could use against, All For One. So he ends up pretty much beginning to get beaten by All For One, and he holds his own. He begins dodging a bunch of the attacks, don't get me wrong, but eventually All For One ends up powering up this massive gigantic attack that he was gonna shoot All Might with in the original, and when he powers it all up, he ends up actually using a multiplier on top of that, making the gigantic fist even bigger than it should be, and leading to All For One actually bringing down his gigantic arm filled with multiple quirks down on Izuku as he hits him with the most powerful brutal attack that the My Hero Academia universe has seen thus yet. And this would send Izuku flying as he would pretty much dissipate in a white aura of just mass destruction. When All For One would look, there would be no remnants of Izuku. It's as if his body disappeared, and Izuku would lose consciousness of oneself as he falls into a deep void, and from it, he finally arises. Izuku would finally tap into mastered Ultra Instinct for just a second, leaving Izuku more than enough time to tap into the full 100% version of One For All and his full power Ultra Instinct state, thus the thumbnail of the video. And if you guys want a reminder to how that looks, just look at the thumbnail. So once Izuku gets up bloodied and battered, Izuku is finally able to unlock his final quirk. And what is that quirk? Energy Beam. Izuku cups both hands together and doesn't end up yelling Kamehameha, which is I'm pretty sure many of you guys were expecting. No, Izuku's eyes just pretty much are glowing white, and he then aims his hands right at the direction of All For One, who puts up multiple barriers, sensing that Izuku got way more powerful. But those barriers get shattered. One after the other, they just all break. As All For One is forced to watch as his life force and everything that he's worked for in terms of quirks and all that just gets eliminated by some 15-year-old kid with Ultra Instinct and All For One. Better than All Might could have ever done, and it would eradicate every cell of All For One's being. This man is dead. That's it. GG. All For One gone, and there were no news police or stations to even watch any of this happen. So Izuku actually pretty much ends up getting away with this scot-free, and once he pretty much is done unleashing this gigantic attack, Izuku would be hit with the repercussions of using all of this all at once. Izuku would pretty much get hit with the same effect that Goku got hit with when black lightning struck his body and stuff like that. That's exactly kind of what ends up happening to Izuku, where he falls down unconscious, and eventually a rescue jet would arrive, saving Izuku, bringing him to Recovery Girl, where he would end up recovering for quite a while. By the way, guys, in case you guys keep hearing my door make these loud noises, it's just because of the air being turned on and off. It's pretty powerful in my house, and I use pretty decent editing software to take out the fan noise. So yeah. Anyways, though, what ends up happening following this is about 1 week after this, Izuku finally is able to wake up after being treated by Recovery Girl and getting that smooch, you know what I mean? And eventually what ends up going down is, following that giant altercation that happened with the villains and Kamino City accident and all that, All Might asks Izuku what exactly happened, with Izuku waking up to actually seeing Bakugo and Tokiyami. During the time that Izuku was knocked out, the pro heroes were able to find their location and actually take out the remaining villains that were on the side of All For One, leading to the total annihilation of the League of Villains. And that was one genuinely amazing fell swoop that they were able to, pretty much manage when it comes to the taking out of all these villains and, the entire arc overall. Izuku, having Ultra Instinct, is now finally bearing its fruits, and taking out the big and bad of the series essentially only leads one more villain to be seen, which is Overhaul. And I know many of you guys are probably going to be like, all right, so now we're going to cover the provisional hero. Absolutely not. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. We're skipping that completely. And we're just going to straight jump into what I actually care about, which is the introduction of the big three. Now, this happens just like it does in canon, except the only major change that actually happens to the story is after Mirio ends up pretty much beating everybody down to a pulp, and he goes towards Izuku trying to do the same and proving to him that he has more experience. Izuku taps into Ultra Instinct Omen, and because he still can't tap into the perfected mastered version at will, he's able to dodge that attack and dodge the second attack that was coming from Mirio, and actually dodge all of Mirio's surprise attacks, which is something that Mirio was simply not used to. It was almost as if he was fighting Sir Nada, who knew what Mirio was planning before even he knew. And and Mirio was very shocked at the fact that Izuku was this proficient with his quirk. Overall, it's incredible. Mirio never expected something like this from a kid of Izuku's, grade level, size, or just in general experience. But overall, Izuku still is unable to hit Mirio, so that would lead to Mirio eventually tiring Izuku out, since he does have more stamina with his quirk, I believe. Eventually landing a blow on him, which doesn't knock Izuku out or anything, but it definitely sends him stumbling back, and Aizawa would call the match before anything serious could really go down. So following that, I definitely think Mirio would offer Izuku a position at Sir Nidai's agency just due to how impressed he is with him, and Izuku, he has no real reason to decline. He would have gone with Gran Torino, but the fact that Gran Torino is actually a little busy right now with the League of Villains situation that's been going down, Izuku's unable to. So Nidai is basically the perfect option. He was All Might's sidekick after all, and Izuku doesn't see any better option whatsoever. So he happily ends up taking up Mirio's offer, and he ends up actually going off to intern with Sir Nidai, going off to the Overhaul situation, which still ends up happening essentially almost like it does in canon, where Izuku arrives there, and Sir Nidai would end up pretty much telling Izuku that he has two ways of making it in. Number one, he could make him laugh. Or number two, he could end up taking a stamp and signing the paper himself. What do you guys think is going to be easier for Izuku? If you chose option number two, then you were absolutely correct, because ain't no way this man Izuku was finna make Nidai laugh. I'm sorry, but I don't care who you are. Not even Kevin Hart could make this man laugh. Sir Nidai just seems too serious and like he has a stick up his ass too much to the point where he could even laugh at anything. I feel like he's the type of person to purposefully not laugh just to make you feel bad. Sir Nidai is the type of person to like eat popcorn with a spoon. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just get that vibe from him. I never liked him, but I like Mirio. So, we kind of have to compromise a little bit there. Anyways, following this would happen, 2 days would go by, and eventually Izuku and Deku would actually be out on hero patrol when suddenly Izuku was bumped into by a small girl with white hair, and I think Eri has like yellow eyes. I'm not sure. Or red eyes. No, she had like red eyes. I don't know. But regardless, Eri bumps into Deku, and when Deku looks down to Eri, he's like, "Hey, are you okay?" Eri's just shaking, and she's visibly worried about who's coming out of the alleyway. They look up, and when Mirio sees, he would see Overhaul, to the surprise of himself and Midoriya, since he was actually briefed into the situation just a little bit. Izuku, understanding what's going on, would begin playing it off as if he has no idea what's happening, and he would look to Mirio, who would at this point tell him, "Don't do anything." But Sir Nidai, because Sir Nidai was planning something already, so there's no real point. Izuku would look to Mirio as he would tell him that there's no way he's just gonna stand by and let this happen. And what would end up happening is essentially Overhaul ends up beginning trying to take his glove off, pretty much baiting Eri to go back to him, and Eri would jump off of Izuku, beginning to run back towards Overhaul. And in that split second, it was as if Izuku's body, oh my god, moved on its own, as he instinctively got in front of Eri, pushed her back to Mirio, and immediately came in with a flying punch that sends Overhaul crashing into the wall, straight knocking him out upon first impact. This man Izuku instinctively tapped into Ultra Instinct Omen, and then went right into his 75% full cowling state and punched this man Overhaul with Fa Jin active at the same time. Could you imagine the monstrous damage that would do to someone? I'm surprised that this blow didn't just send his head flying clean off his body. And the only reason that didn't happen is because Eri's present, if we're being honest. So Overhaul pretty much ends up becoming, how do I put this? Paralyzed? He's a vegetable now. Because that blow is, you're not recovering that from that, I'm sorry. But what would end up happening is essentially Izuku's agency with Sir Nidai would be terminated early because of the fact that he did that to a villain. While he was a villain, you're still not allowed to do that much damage to somebody, regardless of what the situation was. So Izuku would get reprimanded for the situation and would have his provisional hero license, his license kind of revoked for a couple of months. Eventually Izuku would end up getting it back, and the UA Sports Festival, the UA Festival would still end up happening just like it does in canon, with Gentle trying to essentially, run in and pretty much like ruin everything. but Izuku, as well as the rest of UA security, would be able to handle Sir Gentle Criminal, and what ends up going down after that is essentially basic My Hero Academia stuff. It's almost as if Class 1A was now finally able to live as normal students, just chilling in their dormitories, going to school. The next 2 years would pass, and eventually after Izuku would graduate, he would pretty much go on to become the #1 hero almost overnight. Not really, it takes him a couple of months, but you guys know what I mean, right? Like, it happens so fast that it almost seems as if it just happened from one day to the other. Kind of like how celebrity kids grow up from one day to the next. Yeah, kind of like that. Izuku ends up establishing his own pro hero agency, and All Might just could not be any more proud of Izuku. He changes his hero costume, and Izuku is just a total badass. He becomes the greatest hero that the world has ever known. And yeah, what did you guys think about the story of how Izuku became the greatest hero of all, with the addition of Ultra Instinct at his side? If you guys enjoyed any part of this video, make sure to go down below and smash that like button, as well as share with a friend. And if you're here for the movie version, then comment it down below. Comment #movie if you are here from that. Also, if you made it to the end of the video, that would help me know that you made it. And I just have to give a quick shout out to the top 10 hero members of the channel, which get so many perks. And by so many, I basically just mean early access, as well as shout outs at the end of these videos, but something is something, right? So, quick shout out to Robert P, Steamzy.124, and Dead Rising 28 so much for being top 10 hero members of the channel. Thank you guys for joining, and as always, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Zether, and I am out. Peace.